This didn't happen too recently, but actually happened last summer when my wife and I, kids, and wife's cousin's family decided to do a joint impromptu trip to the beach. We booked an Airbnb condo about 3 minutes away from beach access. It was going to be wonderful. I want to state that what happened during this trip didn't really hinder our experiences much, as it just kind of made us wonder, what the hell is really going on? The day we're supposed to leave, we get all packed up and ready to hit the road. We're actually about a good 4 hours away from this beach, so it took us quite a drive. By the time we get near where we're supposed to check in at, it's already getting dusky outside. For those who are curious as to what town this took place in, this was in Seaside, Oregon. I'm sure many of your listeners might be familiar with that town. It is one of the most popular beaches on the West Coast. There's a small town north of Seaside known as Gearhart. I don't know anything about the specifics of that town, like how big it is, population, etc. I only know that it sits north. This is important because this is where the sighting took place. Seaside and Gearhart have one mighty highway that travels all along with it, Highway 101. I believe Highway 101 is the main highway that rides all along the entire West Coast through many beach towns, but I could be wrong. Anyway, we're traveling north on this road, and we have to make a left turn onto Gearhart Road, which, after a short distance, opens up into this massive golf course on both sides of the road. The road then turns to the left, and there sits the main office building to check in at. I forget the name of the place we stayed at, so forgive me. I can only remember distinctive buildings. Again, surrounded by a massive golf course with only a few trees on the side of the road, so you can see everything pretty clearly. We're just starting to approach the section of the road that has the golf course, and my family and I are amazed to see that there are literally hundreds of wild elk everywhere. I've never seen so many elk in my life. I wish I would have stopped to take a picture. There were some bulls among the giant herd, but it looked to be mostly all cows. As we're coming to the turn in the road, and astonished at all the elk everywhere, my wife notices something off in the distance of the golf course. Now, before I go further, right as you enter this area of the road, there's a thick layer of woods between Highway 101 and this left turn in the road, followed by the golf course. And this layer of woods is this large creek/river that runs through. I have no idea what it's called. My wife notices several, I'm talking maybe 10 plus elk running for their life for the rest of the herd as this giant black dog-shaped thing chases after them. I couldn't really look too well because I'm driving, but I do see it. My wife starts freaking out, asking me what the hell is that and if I see it. It was far away, but it was easily as big as the elk were, if not taller, and chasing them on what appeared to be two legs. It was fast. We only watched it for maybe 5 seconds before we arrived at the office to check in. Where the parking lot is, which is smaller, you can't see over a small hill in the distance. I run out of the car to run in and check in to our condo. My wife is acting nervous and still freaking out a little at what just transpired. I really wasn't sure to make of it, but it wasn't bothering me as much. I came out a few minutes later. Wife was still nervous, but didn't see anything, even though we were right by the elk by the parking lot. We turned around and drove out the parking lot and to our condo, which was down the road and away from the golf course. Didn't end up seeing it after that. We actually ended up forgetting all about it, to be honest. The next day, we planned all sorts of activities to do with the kids at the beach, so we loaded back up in our car and back out the way we came, by the road. The road with the golf course. I believe was still Gearhart Road, and it's the only way to our knowledge to get to Highway 101 from our condo. As we're driving back through it, the following morning, having completely forgot about the prior evening, there were cops all over the place. No signs of elk anywhere, but We counted 5 cruisers and multiple officers with shotguns, what looked to be weapons and automatic rifles. They were pointing out to the woods. Some looked like they were scouting the area, while others were on call. I had no idea what the hell was going on, but my wife and I thought maybe there might have been an escaped convict or something crazy. What else would warrant all those officers on the scene of that golf course? If I had to guess, there were at least 7 or 8 that were heavily armed. I truly don't know because I really didn't count. If what we saw the night before had anything at all to do with the officers being there, then it was super weird. When we returned later on that night to come back to the condo for the day, they were gone, so I truly don't know what happened. When we had the initial sighting, there were multiple cars parked in the parking lot and another car or 2 driving on the road we were on. I don't know if they saw what we did, but nobody seemed to be paying attention or even making it a big deal. Hell, I don't even know for sure that is what we saw. I don't think I really gave it much thought until I discovered something called Dogman after listening to your podcast episodes. I can't guarantee that's what it is, but the descriptions of what I saw closely match your witness descriptions. Back in the late 1980s, I helped manage and run a bar outside of a small town in West Virginia. I won't say the name because I don't want my name tied to it in any way. If I revealed the name or location of this establishment, I would be tied to this thing so fast. I can't risk my reputation. But I will say that I've had plenty of experiences, along with several customers with an unknown hyena canine cross. I don't think there's a simpler way to put it. It was terrifying, and this animal, I'll call it, appeared very aggressive. It never attacked me or caused me any personal harm, but it has attacked other vehicles, parts of the buildings, and even other customers. I've had crew chased out of the property late at night. There was a really bad attack that happened in the early spring one year. A customer almost got his arm bitten off entirely. Lots of blood. No police involvement though, which was more than weird. These animals had broken windshields, damaged vehicles, pulled off tires of cars to the point of where they are severely damaging the axle. You name it. We've fired all kinds of guns and weapons at them, but nothing really seemed to hurt these things. Only keep them at bay and chase them off into the night. Let me give you some of the finer details. So, I co-managed this bar with a friend of mine for around 4 years of business, and it was great. We had a lot of regulars, but I will always remember around spring and fall time, we would start experiencing strange things around the outside. Our bar didn't have a whole lot of people and neighborhoods or other businesses around. We were kind of out of the way, tucked outside of town, surrounded by one road with lots of timber and woods all around. It was common that we'd get animals here and there that would wander onto the property, but not like what we would experience. We would hear strange noises we could never quite explain. The shifting shadows, you feel like you're being watched. Some of the first events when we had a customer come in shortly after, leaving one evening, complaining that some large dog just ripped the bumper off his car while he was exiting the parking lot. I wanted to know if anybody owned a dog, and of course, none of us did. Staff would report seeing and hearing noises just beyond the light of outside lights of the bar, all while people having their windows smashed and cars left without mirrors and minor claw marks. That, of course, is just how things started off. We encourage our employees to bring weapons and store them safely in their car, just in case they felt threatened. We did hear gunshots go off sometimes, and during the fall and spring, it wasn't uncommon for employees to call in for work because they were scared. We had many waitresses and cooks come and go for this very reason. We were not sure what to make of it because no one had really seen what animal was doing this. Some employees quit the same night, saying some large hyena black animal had chased them in their car, while others talked about getting in their car and this strange, hideous creature pressing its face against the driver's side window, trying to open the door. It became a severe enough problem again and would die down again in the winter and summer months, and we wouldn't really have this many issues. I knew a lot of the issues and would pop up in spring, but I didn't have a first-hand account with it until the following fall. I was walking out to my car one night, going to exit when this tall-looking creature, covered in shaggy black hair, steps out from behind the side of the bar and starts to quickly walk in my direction. The second I saw it, I had mixed emotions of confusion and terror as I sprinted to my car and got in and out as quickly as I could. As soon as I made it to my car, not only was this creature still following me, but it had picked up its pace towards my vehicle, and its entire demeanor went from calm to very aggressive. I wasn't carrying any weapons on me at this time. It was a couple weeks later that a customer was leaving the bar at night, just like I had, and was supposedly attacked so bad that his arm was almost torn off entirely. We never saw him again because he never returned, and like I said earlier, police did show up and take statements, but they never returned for a follow-up investigation. In fact, we were blown off by the police when we called and asked for help the first few times that spring, so we just assumed we were on our own. They did not have the manpower to do a proper investigation and stop whatever this animal was. The thing is, nobody really talked about what it was. Everybody just thought it was a bunch of wild coyotes or wolves or maybe a bear. It wasn't until customers and employees started seeing these things that they began to be widespread panic and fear. It crippled business for some time because it got so bad. At the time, we didn't have any sort of surveillance of any sort. I wish we did, because we could have had clear footage of these things. Multiples of them would hang around at nighttime, run across the parking lot, and just cause havoc. Everyone I talked to, or who had told me about their experience with these things, all lined up to the same basic description of what I saw. Hyena, wolf-looking creatures, very tall and shaggy, lots of black hair, walking on two legs, huge claws, very ugly and deformed looking. These things would try and attack my staff and customers on a nightly basis, but never really do anything serious. Or, I should say serious harm. Many times they were shot at, but all it did was scare them off, and they would flee. None were ever killed to my knowledge, or that I knew about. I knew the word werewolf had been thrown around a few times, but I never took that seriously, because I know werewolves don't exist. These things were something else different entirely, in my opinion, even though they did have similar appearances. They weren't the violent eating and killing people like how Hollywood would portray them to be if they were indeed werewolves. An interesting thing I learned about 10 years after I left the managing position is that place, well, that entire area, about 150 years prior to development, was actually a part of a large Indian burial ground that was excavated and developed. I don't know exactly what was developed, but that development later turned into other things. One of the other things being the bar, for one. I know the bar that I come in and just had been there for a good 30 plus years is still there to this very day. I don't know, and I can't say if these things still harass an area. I'm friends with a local medicine man from my area, and when I told him about my experiences, he warned me about talking about it, because it will simply draw those negative energies to me, so it's best to not discuss it. The other thing he warned me was those things were trying to scare people off of their land, and they had some connection with the tribes that were there previous to development. He explained that once the burial site was excavated, it stirred up and angered the spirits. I'm a very scientific person, so I take this all with a grain of salt. But I do find it very intriguing, to say the least, especially with the experiences that I've had, my staff has had, and multiple customers have had that defy what we know in modern-day science. I can't say those things were demons because they were very much flesh and blood from what I witnessed. This is something pretty big that I'm going to tell you about. I know for a fact that the Tulsa Police Department is hiding details about my cousin's death. Before I go any further, I'll tell you a little bit about my cousin. He was a great man, was in his mid-30s and one of the greatest trackers I have ever had the pleasure of meeting. The man was on point with his craft. He was an avid hunter and knew the outdoors like most people know their own backhand. Tracking was his craft, and that was what he was a master at, and had been since he was just a boy. Him and I were born the same year, and this all happened just in the last few years. Well, he purchased acreage east outside of Tulsa, Oklahoma. I would visit him frequently through the week since we were close. This particular time I visited, I knew something was wrong. He didn't answer the door like he usually does, so I thought something might be off. I opened his back gate to go see if he was out back, and his wife is rushing up to me, screaming for help and covered in blood. I go into full-blown panic, thinking something seriously wrong happened. She's a blubbering mess, trying to tell me he was attacked by some large gray animal, and she's trying to keep him alive and told my cousin she'd leave to go call 911. I go running to him off in the distance. He's a bloody mess, hardly breathing. When I run up to him, I distinctly remember my stomach churning and wanting to vomit. Both of his legs had been partially torn off his body, twisted and mangled. His left arm was gone and parts of his stomach had been torn open, revealing his intestines and other organs. He hadn't bled out all the way yet, but was oozing fat and blood through his wounds. He looked like he jumped down into a canyon of blackberry bramble. He had deep claw marks and gashes all over him. He looked like he got straight up mauled by a grizzly bear, but worse. I'm surprised he was even still conscious, let alone alive. He couldn't acknowledge or speak to me because he was in shock. The longer I was there trying to keep him alive, screaming at him, talking to him, anything I could do to keep him awake. I started noticing big teeth mark holes in his body, like some large animal was biting and trying to take chunks out of his flesh. It popped into my mind the first time that he had been almost devoured by a bear. Not even 30 seconds later, my cousin took his final breath. Paramedics arrived some 12 minutes later, only to declare him dead on arrival. Officers and many county workers arrived to deal with the incident on hand. His wife and I were escorted off the property to have them deal with the investigation of what happened. Red flags were all over this because you are never escorted off your own property or family's property over something like this that we knew of, so something was going on. His wife and I at first refused to leave, but were threatened with being detained, so we were forced. At first, we thought there was a large bear around, but there were multiple armed officers, people from the county, the sheriff, and other people in uniforms we didn't recognize, all frantically moving around the property and moving my cousin's body out quickly. We weren't given any answers as to what truly happened and told to not talk about it to anybody. The only answers we were sort of given is that there was a bear attack, and that was the end of that. His wife said that what attacked him wasn't a bear. She only faintly saw it. She said she ran out when she heard him screaming and saw this big gray animal on top of him, ripping at him and eating on him. She said it looked nothing like a bear, but it ran away on two legs, had a longer muzzle, and was a silver gray color. When she told me, I didn't know if I could believe her. It seemed so outlandish and crazy. Her tears were so genuine. I couldn't disbelieve her. She saw something maul my cousin and her husband to death. The police kept us from entering the property for almost a week. They had things tapered off and areas where he died you couldn't access. Anyway, I don't know what it is that attacked and killed my cousin, but it was not a bear. A bear doesn't do the damage to his body the way I saw, not like what I saw. I'm very familiar with how bear and grizzly bear kill and eat their prey, even if it is human attacks. This was much worse. This was far more gory. I've been threatened with all sorts of charges and given ample warnings, told not to interfere by lawyers and advisors, but I don't care. I want the truth known about what happened to my cousin, even if that means I'll get charged with impeding on investigations. Had a job for a while back where I helped clean up the neighborhood by going through by hand and foot and picking up trash. I did this with the county to help clean things up. One evening, I was working at this large empty plot of land where there had once been a bum camp. Piles of trash and garbage, much of it all over the place due to the wind. I was taking care of it, spending my time making sure I got as much trash as I could. I felt like I was being watched at one point. It's not uncommon for people to notice you, but this felt ominous. When I looked up, about a football field away, watching me from the trees nearby was this very large dark shadow that had glowing eyes. It was up in the tree itself, nestled in thick branches. It appeared to be looking right in my direction. I had a mini heart attack, not knowing what it was, what was spying on me. I don't know if it saw me, but with lightning speed, it jumped down out of the tree and flew off to my right into the thicker woods. It happened so fast that I only caught a glimpse of the general shape. It was tall, dark like a shadow, had larger ears on the top of its head, which looked more like a big dog head. I couldn't make out much detail on the body, other than its large size and that it was upright like a man. My friend, who lives in Durango, Colorado, told me he just recently had to sell his cabin because of a traumatic experience that happened to him. He's a tough dude, more than a lot of men out there. He doesn't really get scared too easily, and had this family cabin out in Durango, partially in the woods. He was staying there with himself and 2 dogs one night when this large wolf creature broke into the house, killed and ate one of his dogs entirely, and tried to come after my friend. My friend put a few good rounds in him before it fled the cabin. He tried chasing it and tracking it down to kill it, but he couldn't find it. This thing broke off the sliding glass door that was attached to his cabin. I guess it was pretty bad. He doesn't really like talking about it. It used to belong to his father. His father passed it on to him when he died years and years back. He's now looking to pass ownership off to somebody else in his family because of what happened. My Uncle Sal used to live in northern New York State, where he lived there his whole life. He passed away in 2004, but will always be remembered as one of my favorite uncles. He died of kidney failure and was an all-around great human being. My Uncle Sal was a huge stoner, though. So much so that back in the 80s and 90s, he had a small grow-op going on in his backyard. I think anywhere between 12 to 20 plants growing at all times. I couldn't give you the dimensions of his garden, but when the plants started flowering, you could really smell it. There was no hiding it. Luckily for Sal, though, both his neighbors on both sides were cool with it and didn't care. His neighbors were also not right up his butt. They were spaced out a little. They had some privacy. They had woods that went on for miles beyond their backyards, and the front was a main road that led more into the neighborhood. My uncle told me that sometimes at night he would hear this gurgling sound outside, accompanied by heavy thudding. He thought somebody was breaking into his backyard to steal his plants or to sabotage his garden. He runs out there for the first time and sees this monster, as he described it, walking on 2 legs, looking like some dog wolf on steroids, ripping his plants out of the ground and taking them. He gets a good couple shots off on one, and it runs away, taking his plant. He said the smell of wet dog and rotting meat was so powerful, it overpowered the smell of pot. To quote my uncle, "I had a fucking werewolf in my backyard, stealing my pot." He never seemed as terrified that he was dealing with a creature like he was, just angry that it was coming at his plants. Sal's next-door neighbor was actually half native, and always had lots of native family over. He was closer with my uncle. They were around the same age, and they spent quite a bit of time together, I guess. He soon learned about this large werewolf-like creature getting into my uncle's backyard. He tells my uncle that the creature is actually called what was it? Something I can't quite remember what he called it. Anyway, their tribe did have a name for it. I'm sorry, I'm drawing a blank. Anyway, he explained to Sal that because those plants produce a thick odor, they almost repel these things and they don't like it. It must have done more than repel, because this thing was breaking into his backyard and ripping out his plants. That's not repelling, that's just agitation. My uncle would sleep out there at night sometimes, in a lawn chair, with a gun on his lap, waiting for this thing to make its move. My uncle was crazy, and I don't recall him telling me any more encounters he had with this werewolf creature after that particular time, although I'm sure he did. Maybe it was short-lived. I do remember him telling me, though, that once those plants matured and harvested, he transplanted everything to an inside grow room to not deal with the issue anymore.